Hello, climbers. I remember when the doctors came into my inpatient care hospital room to say it's time to come home, but I was just standing there wondering, how? The meds are working, the charts are stable, and yet nothing about this feels easy or finished. Today, we're talking about that in-between moment when the hospital doors close behind you and the real work of healing begins. The fear, the planning, the small acts of rebuilding trust, what it means to keep someone safe when you're scared too. This is the next big part of our story, and maybe the hardest one yet. Let's get into it. Welcome to Mom and Me Climbing Mountains Together, a podcast about showing up for each other in the messy middle of life. I'm Eleni, and alongside my mom, Ashley, we're sharing our story of navigating mental health, identity, family, and all the ups and downs that come with growing up and parenting at the same time.
We don't have all the answers. What we do have are honest conversations, sometimes heavy, sometimes hopeful, but always real. Our hope is that by climbing these mountains together out loud, you'll feel a little less alone in your own journey.
So, let's take a deep breath, settle in, and let's begin.
So we'll start out with our normal mom disclaimer before we start chatting. So we're going to talk about some heavy topics. We're talking about mental health. There are going to be topics of suicide coming up. You do not have to listen to all of it. You can stop, go, take your time, come back to it later. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, definitely, if it's urgent, if it's life-threatening, call 911, but you can call or text 988 as well for help, and they will connect you to local resources that can help you through the crisis. And just know that you're loved and valued, and there are people there to help you. So thanks for listening. Here we go. So we're talking about inpatient. We haven't gotten to outpatient yet, but we're getting close to the end of the inpatient visit. We talked last time about that are we ready to discharge yet appointment, where I kind of had my moment, the catalyst moment, the kind of frustration of, as a parent, what can I do to help keep my child safe? A kind of frustration because I know I don't know everything, and I needed resources to tap into to figure out how to prepare for you to come home and to leave that environment. And there's something that I think listeners who have had children can probably relate to this thought process I had. But I remember the first time with each kid really, but especially when I had you, I wasn't in the hospital for very long. You're a newborn. And then it was time for discharge. It's like, there you go. Peace out. Good luck. Bye. Right? And you're given like some handouts and things like that. But it's all on me going home with this newborn baby with no experience ever doing anything like this before in my life. I nannied. Well, it's still not the same. Trying to keep you alive and safe. And that's what that appointment was for me is, oh, wow. Okay. So she's doing well enough here in this inpatient program to be able to leave it soon. However, you're not all in the clear. You're not completely miraculously healed of anything that is balled up to this moment, right?
No. Yeah, no.
And that was my realization. It's like, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. I have no idea how to prepare for you to come home and to keep you safe. I have 2 other kids in the house I have to keep safe. I have a job. I don't have enough job security with where I was working to be able to take an unlimited amount of time off. I didn't qualify for a short-term medical leave, for family care leave, because I hadn't been in my job for a minimum of 12 months, yada, 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 right? So yeah, there's all these things that could help, but what happens when you don't qualify for any of those things, right? That's where we were at right now. And my boss was he'd gone through issues on his own with his own family. You know, everybody has trouble. So he was very empathetic and sympathetic, and he was trying to be flexible enough, but the job had to be done, right? And it wasn't a remote job or whatever. I had to be there in person. So thankfully, we're using what we can for vacation and sick leave. But I realized also at that meeting, I'm going to tap out of this soon. It is about to be June. You have 2.5 months of summer before you're supposed to be anywhere that qualifies for like an all-day babysitting to make sure you're safe, right? I can't bring you to work with me. What in the world was I supposed to do? Dad had to work. There's 2 kids. We had to both work to make sure they were in daycare. And you could not be home by yourself. That's what was going through my head at this appointment. So it was a happy appointment and we were really glad you were doing better. But there's still, for lack of a better phrase, there's still a huge mountain to climb here, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't have enough tools for this at all. Were you feeling excited about the prospect of discharging?
I was certainly glad and looking forward to having my freedom again and a sense of normal. But I also was dreading coming back because this week was the first time in a while where I had a break and time to myself. And it was very foreign, but I grew to like it. And when we had that meeting, it kind of struck me like, this isn't going to happen again in a while. I'm going to go straight back to our busy life. Boom, boom, boom. School, hockey, babysitting, all these extracurriculars. And I'm not going to have a single break to myself again. And high school, that's a whole new school. And I just started kind of getting used to the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard stories about the local high school. Of course, there are stereotypes and mean rumors. And I didn't really know what to believe, but it was scary. And like I said, I dreaded it because I didn't want to go back to such an urgent and restless life. And also, like the dark house, it felt really depressing to go in there. And as much as I like going to my room, that was just my bed in the corner, sharing it with my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't want that. I really didn't. And I didn't know the plans that you had, you and Dad had. I thought I was going back to my small little corner. But when I got out, things were different.
I want to add some perspective. This is not like a defense mechanism, but explaining a little bit more about the house and the dark house and the sharing of the room. When we moved up to Duluth, I mean, there's still a housing crisis, right? Like there's not enough homes for people.
No.
We went from a very large home to the home that we could get. That was like, we needed like it to be a certain location. We needed it big enough somehow for all of us, right?
Going from a 4-bed, 2-bath, although it is one floor, it was pretty spacious, going and moving to
4-bed, 3-bath to 2-bed, 1-bath.
Yeah. 2-bed, 1 bathroom with
And
5 people.
At that time, we had only been, was the end of May. So 5, 6, not even 7 months, like barely 6.5 months living in the house. And everybody knows it takes time to update the home and to renovate and all that. And when we moved, we went straight into hockey season, which if, anyone's a sport parent, especially hockey, we love hockey. So we're always at the rink and we're always doing stuff. So we weren't home that much. So Eleni knew, we've talked about this outside of the podcast, you knew and understood her circumstance, right? We were obviously doing the best that we could, but she still didn't have, me reflecting now, she didn't still have a choice in anything that was happening. And she knew that her dad and I were doing our best. So were you going to make me feel guilty that you didn't like our house at the time? That was a bummer,
Yeah. Well, I understood because we had moved a lot in the past, and I do get that it does take a bit to settle into a new house. But then again, it's hard being stuck in that house in just the new area and having to adapt to it so quickly.
Yep.
And not being used to it at all.
So one thing that added to the darkness, and I brought this up in the last podcast, we ended up changing the living room to be the sunroom. So living in Duluth, it gets very cold in the winter. And I had purchased these blackout, dark, heavy curtains to help with insulating the windows. And the house is old. So, it was supposed to help with the lighting. And so when we did this sunroom, everything was brighter. We actually ended up taking down the drop down ceiling at some point, which added an extra 6 inches to the ceiling height. And everything's all white and bright now. And we talked about this before. We totally redid your room and new bedding, and everything was changed and everything was different. We even did new stuff for the kids and all that. Couch pillows, all of it. So thankfully, when discharge was finally a thing, you were able, again, very lucky, very, very lucky, you were able to get a spot in the local outpatient program. Not going to say what it is. If you're from Duluth, I'm sure you're well aware of what it is if you're kind of in that world. Really good program, amazing. Very lucky if you can get your foot in the door, especially transitioning from discharging in the inpatient, going directly into outpatient and not having to wait X number of weeks or months kind of thing.
Yeah, because the doctor told us that it was basically once in a lifetime chance because usually they're so booked. And there was 1, maybe 2 spots open for this first time slot.
Yep. But that required, it was an all-day program that required you being driven up to the location. I don't want to say facility, but the location, and then getting picked up at 3:30 or something. And my normal work hours were 7 to 4:30. So again, accommodations, not saying this obviously to guilt people, but it's an awareness thing. I also had to ask for a work accommodation for that as well. And your dad and I had to kind of juggle that and figure that out because I couldn't just be done for work for the day, or maybe I could, maybe some days I had to go back, but someone had to be there with you at home so you weren't by yourself. We also had to buy a special locks for a medicine cabinet. We had to lock up pizza cutters, scissors, knives, anything potentially sharp in the kitchen. So we bought like a 4 or 5 digit like gun safe that just slid into the drawer. You weren't given the code. Obviously, your siblings were too young to need to access the sharp things anyways. So they didn't have the code. So it was just us. But we had to figure out how to prepare to somehow learn in a very short amount of time how to prepare, how to be ready for you to come home, right? Mm-hmm. You were in inpatient by yourself. You learned all these coping strategies and everything by yourself. And yeah, sure, you brought home the material that we could review and we were told about it. However, still didn't experience it, right? Like I have to actually do it for it to really sink in. I can hear it and I can read it and that's fine, but I need to actually do things to learn it and absorb it. And outpatient, you're going to a place where you are learning all of this stuff and better ways of being. I wasn't going through this program and learning with you. Part of my bachelor's degree is focused in conflict resolution courses, and I went to a very specific conflict resolution training involved in that degree. And this brilliant woman, known internationally, does all sorts of trainings for these sort of, environments, conflict resolution trainings. She said one thing that is stuck with me, even 2 decades later, going through that experience at the time, that was the voice in my head I heard was, going through this training program will enrich your world. It'll give you so much information and so much power to go forward and to do amazing things. However, you will also have to live in the same world as other people who have not taken this course, have not gone through any sort of conflict resolution training, and you're going to have to figure out how to apply these skills to interact with them. I wasn't thinking of myself with that statement. I was thinking of you learning all these coping techniques and coming home and being like, wow, my parents are so dumb, or my parents don't get it, or can't they see they're making things worse for me? They're literally doing, or they said whatever, and that was literally something you shouldn't say to someone like me in this moment, right? That's what was going through my head. And it was freaking me out. Do you remember a lot of the stuff that you learned there?
Well, I know a big thing that stuck out to me was sections of the day. I think it was certain days of the week where they talked about substance use. And that stuck out to me because I never learned about it before. And I didn't realize that people my age struggled with it so much. Like, yeah, younger people have started bad habits recently, especially on substance use, and it's not good for you. And I never understood the prep about it, but it was definitely good for me to learn about it, even if I wasn't affected by it. That's one of the only things that I can remember mostly, but also personal struggles that I learned through. I've said this a lot, but it went to as simple as putting cream cheese on my bagel. I've told you this a lot, like I've said, but even the thought of a knife.
A butter knife.
I know, a butter knife, even. That terrified me. Like, that filled me with dread. And it was flashes of PTSD all over again. And I couldn't do it my first week. And that was one of the breakfast options that they had. And I just couldn't. I would refuse to have that for breakfast. And eventually, one of the instructors, she gently guided me through it. And at first, she told me, why don't we try a plastic one at first? And then we can move on to a normal one. Okay, can you do this with me? No, I told her yeah. And that was a big step for me. It doesn't really seem like it because you may think, like, who has trouble spreading cream cheese on a bagel? But that moment was huge for me. That was the first time that I didn't freak out over a sharp object.
But I think that's pretty important to reflect on right now, even for our listeners, because you didn't just all of a sudden like go take the pills and, you know, try the vodka at home. Like I'm not saying you use those substances. I'm saying the dark feelings and thoughts that you've had, we now know you had for a while, and you had developed a pattern of negative self-talk and really dragging your own self down internally. And the shock and trauma of going through the ER, going through inpatient, and now outpatient was surrounding like breaking a harmful cycle of hurting yourself. And you realize that like there are people who sure have done worse things to themselves than what you've done, quote unquote. But you had fallen into a hole that was so deep that did kind of put yourself at that level, right? Like,
yeah.
Are you, and you know, even as a parent, like thinking about you, it's like, am I going to be able to trust you at all? Am I going to have to walk with you all the time? Am I going to have to do like the stuff I learned as a treatment counselor I always meal prepped. I always checked. The kids weren't allowed to have the doors of the room shut. There was always room checks where I would walk the hallways and check on everybody, like literally like every 20 minutes of the day. Like, was I about to have to do that to make sure that you were safe? Like, how far down the rabbit hole were you? And that's what we didn't know. So I think for our listeners, you being able to tell them that even using a butter knife or even a plastic ware sort of knife to put cream cheese on the bagel, like everything that you do in your life, there's purpose and intent behind it, right? And you wanted to make sure you were trying to do everything you could to keep yourself safe.
Yeah.
That's super important. But not everyone thinks of stuff that in depth, right?
Yeah, no. Yeah, another thing that was big for me in that program was arts and crafts. We would do mandala art, and then we would do maybe origami, or one day we made roses and flowers. And we actually have this still up on our windowsill in the stairs. That was the first time that I used scissors since
That
my
painting.
incident. Yeah, since the entire experience, the start of it. And it was scary. My hands were shaking and I could barely hold it straight for the craft alone.
Mm-hmm.
I remember staring down at the scissors, thinking back to my thoughts before getting placed, or just before going to the hospital at all. And after a few minutes, I took the skills that I learned in the inpatient, the DBT skills. I can't remember exactly what it's called. I can't remember the D, but I believe it's behavioral therapy. I don't want to say dialect because it's not speaking exactly, but using some of the skills that they taught me, I was able to recenter myself, like going to my happy place even. That was one of the steps, and that's what I did. And then I just felt everything calm down. My hands weren't as shaky anymore, and I was able to touch the scissors without freaking out. And then I was able to finally do the crafts.
I looked it up while you were chatting. It's dialectical behavior therapy.
Yeah, I was pretty close.
Yeah. If any listeners at home want to look that up, DBT, dialectical, dialectical behavior therapy. But asking for help with the knife for your cream cheese, allowing yourself to seek help in the DBT topics that were introduced in Inpatient, you too were basically realizing, kind of parallel to me, that you did need help. You can't do this necessarily on your own. You need to reach out to other resources to help you get through this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole point of this episode is, I've said it before, we've never gone through this before. No. We don't know how this works. And even if we had, it's not the same situation. You know, any parents who think that they know how to handle all this, like, you really don't. And honestly, it is okay that you don't know how to get through this. You know, people, our listeners who are going through, have gone through, you know, a mental health crisis, or who are managing and maintaining, you know, very heavy mental health issues. Like, it's okay to not know how to handle every situation. It's okay to ask for help.
It's okay to not be okay.
Yes.
Quoting our lovely Sophie Squad.
We love Sophie Squad. It is okay to not be okay. It's okay to not know what you're doing. It's okay, even as an adult, for the experience to be new. You know, kids aren't the only ones that are learning things for the first time. So with that, I realized, I think the program was only a week. I don't think it was 2 weeks.
It was 3 weeks.
Okay, thank you. But still not the entire summer.
No, it was not.
So I still maintained figuring out how to ask for help. I have all kinds of friends. There's a friend who works at the county in mental health. I connected with him a lot. Our families are friends anyways through hockey. You play with their daughter. He was an absolute godsend for me. I could text them at any time. He sent me all kinds of resources. Our other friend that we met when we were living in Mississippi, she has her own experiences, and she was a huge support system. You know, our other family members were big support systems for us. And I started doing more and more research. Once I found out about the DBT therapy, I started doing research on that as well. And I figured we would just do what we could to prepare for you to come home, and we would try and take it day by day with very little expectations. The one thing though that I really appreciate towards the end of your outpatient, we did a discharge sort of appointment again with the person in charge of your case. I don't remember their exact title.
For the outpatient?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Outpatient. We established some like safety ground rules, right? Like with what works with our family, knowing we're all leading very active lives, knowing like obviously if you had broken your leg, there would still be things we would have to do to ease back into walking. There were things we had to do to ease back into everyday life. So she helped us establish phrases, right? Signs for me to look for as a parent, with what you were dealing with depression and anxiety. Like if you did need your own space, but you also needed to be careful to not isolate too much, right? And how much is a teen being a teen, like just being grumpy or whatever, having a bad day, versus you're actually in kind of in a crisis mode and I need to take an additional step. That was very hard to kind of prepare for, but there were statements that she helped you and I establish together where if I said, "Are you doing okay?" and you said, "Yeah, I'm fine." If I didn't feel like that was sufficient for me, I was able to, you knew I was able to say the next sentence that was, "But are you really fine?" And I was worried that you were maybe smart enough to take advantage of knowing that second sentence was going to come up. And I had to put everything, the ball was in your court on whether or not you wanted to make the decision to let me in, right? And that was part of the trust there, right? Mama Bear wanting to make sure you're safe. I had to trust that you were telling me the truth in order to interact in that situation and to feel comfortable with you being at home, right? Again, having to keep two younger kids safe, having to keep you safe. So I really appreciated that preparation before that program was actually done. So
I don't remember that at all. I really don't.
And that's okay, right? But I think we're going to wrap this one up. Just know that everyone has cycles and everyone has behaviors and patterns that maybe are in a very micro way harmful. Figure out how to break those harmful cycles to help support each other and grow together. So until next time.
See you later.
See you later.
Thanks for climbing this part of the mountain with us. These conversations aren't easy, but they matter. And we're grateful you're here, listening and walking alongside us.
If today's episode stirred something in you, take a moment to sit with it. Journal about it, share it with someone you trust. And if you're struggling, please remember you don't have to carry it alone. In the US, you can dial or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline anytime you need.
Thank you to the Anne Bancroft Foundation for fulfilling dreams with their grants to girls like me, to my incredible mentor, Jeba Edmonds, for the never-ending encouragement and kindness along the way, and to Asher Carlson, owner of the Duluth Creative Co., who helped bring our vision to life. You never know who you'll meet along the way. We'll meet you here again soon with more stories that remind us none of us climb alone. Until then, hold on to hope, take the next step, and keep climbing.